You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima Abuchi, CEO at Agile Management Office, mental health ambassador, and your host. On today's podcast, we have Katherine Maxey. Katherine is the Vice President of Information Technology at Enviva, a manufacturing company based in the US with over 30 years of experience leading IT teams spanning the manufacturing, retail, and US government sectors. There are a few technologies that Katherine hasn't touched. Much of Katherine's early career was spent working as a project manager and as a PMO, during which time she specialized in systems integration, ERP implementation, and using technology to optimize business processes. Through her scope, she has since expanded all of that work and retains a project and product mindset, driving her teams to seek out and strive for improvements and efficiencies. Please join me in welcoming Katherine to the show. Katherine, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Fatima. Thanks for having me.
At what time is it over there today?
It is 4:06 p.m.
We're at 6:06 a.m., but we're used to working, the different time zones. But it's very dark out here. It feels extremely late, but it's very early and the sun's not out yet. But anyways, it's really great to connect with you again. I usually like to sort of just throw a bit of a random question at the beginning of these conversation. And I'm curious, what was the best thing that happened to you last week, or what was the most frustrating?
Okay, so the best thing that happened to me as a mom, it's not exactly work related, Fatima, but my son's baseball team won their championship game. So last baseball game for his high school career, and they won. So that's always a great thing to, as a parent, to see and celebrate with your kid.
Of course.
That's hands down the highlight of last week. Most biggest disappointment from last week would be I planned to go on Monday to a conference, a little local conference about Gen AI. I was very excited about it. It was free, local, so no cost, and actually getting the opportunity to go out of office and learn something with some peers. And unfortunately, we had an outage that morning at our main headquarters here. And being the head of IT, I had no choice but to, of course, drop everything, come in and support, the team and the company as we worked through it that morning. So I ended up not being able to go. I did have a colleague who went, and he's briefed me on it. So it all worked out.
It's always one of those ones, but considering the topic being AI, it's obviously going to be plenty more opportunities to hopefully get into some of those events.
Absolutely.
So, Katherine, you've been in and around IT across various sectors for like 30 years now, and you've probably had lots of ups and downs in that time. I'm keen to understand, was there a specific moment in your career at any time, in any position, that really shaped your professional journey, but maybe a relationship with a mentor or a particular role or industry? Is there anything that was really pivotal that stands out for you?
Yeah, I always point to pretty early in my career. I would say it was probably the second major project that I had ever led as a project manager at that time. Was for a federal agency at the time, the Parole and Probation Office of Washington, D.C. So we were building a system to track offenders on parole and probation, a case management system for them. And I had a great mentor, her name's Cindy, who, this was early 2000s or so, really drove innovation and supported us as we, just tried to drive towards what otherwise was a very aggressive schedule, a very tight timeline. And she introduced the idea of, hey, let's get together at the end of every day, just have a little stand up at the end of every day. And that was really my first time of seeing what ultimately was, an agile practice of a daily stand-up. Let's talk about what we did today. Let's talk about what's coming up tomorrow. Let's talk about where help was needed. That's just something I always look back to and reflect on today.
And it's really interesting because, you said that was, several years ago, many years ago. And so the concept of having that, introduction to the agile practices, even without probably realizing at the time that that's what it was, Do you think that that was probably that sort of approach that Cindy took and the experience there is what maybe bonded the team? Because when you think about that type of project, and generally in government, it's not very innovative any time. We find that government projects can be quite boring. So what other sort of ways did you bring in to bond the team and make that experience a more enjoyable experience?
Yeah, we absolutely a lot of conversation, and to your point, we weren't calling it Agile at the time. It was just let's get together in Cindy's office, once a day as a core team and talk about things. So that organic nature of it, and that very conversational nature of it, is again just really central, I think, to what those who wrote the manifesto years ago really had in mind. As far as then extending out to the rest of the team, this is a team collaboratively of, let's say, around 20 to 25 people, right? IT and business partners in the federal agency that we were supporting. And again, every day having a conversation. When we came to testing and that deployment weekend, another time I'll never forget, it was over President's Day weekend, which here in the US is a 3-day holiday weekend. And we often have a snowstorm on President's Day weekend here in DC. So we were all snowed in an office in DC, but together that whole time, working pretty long hours, laughing, supporting each other, dealing with the challenges, that we weren't expecting perhaps as the data migrated in. But ultimately then, the next day as we went live and were driving around actually supporting these parole officers and probation officers and just seeing the smiles on their faces, seeing the success of what we did, and really bringing the whole team with us through that whole journey. That group, we still talk, we still get together, we still, laugh about those days. And I think that's a very unique experience that only comes with those types of projects.
It's a really good reflection on obviously that team dynamics component. But one of the things that is evident, you had lots of positives, but was there any particular challenges other than the snow that really pushed the team in that particular instance for that project?
Well, as I already mentioned, the timeline was tight, but I wouldn't even put that as the highest challenge, perhaps. It was probably more about the technology choices that we were given, right? There was a bit of, hey, but use this platform, use these components, some of which were a little bit of square pegs and round holes. But we had to get creative, and we figured it out. We ultimately figured it out. And actually, one piece we ultimately, a few months after we initially went live, redesigned and rewrote into a different tech stack. But still, again, just kind of given that challenge and not saying no, saying, well, it might be a little difficult, but let's figure it out. We're smart people, we're driven people, we're willing to do it. Let's just dive in and solve together.
It's interesting you said tech choices and also square peg round hole. I find that, I don't know if it's still as relevant, but it seems that our IT generally is so misunderstood. I think people just trying to explain the recent outage that you had and some of the work in that space. And just generally, when I'm not sure how it is over there in the US at the moment, but why do you think that IT is still so misunderstood?
Yeah, I think IT's always been misunderstood, but for different reasons over time, right? Mm-hmm. Back when I first came into IT, I was a developer for a few years, and we were the little magicians, right, behind the scenes. So nobody understood us at all, right? Nobody knew what we were doing, and we just made magic happen because nobody understood that realm. We were a little bit unique in that. Nowadays, it's pretty much the opposite, right? I think that there's this fundamental underestimation of the effort that has to go into really making something enterprise grade, because everything is very easy right now, right? And it's a great evolution, but it's one that I don't think we've figured out yet. Mm-hmm. For example, we have Power BI, we have the Power Apps, all this whole Power Platform that Microsoft has come out with, which I think is great. Mm-hmm. We have the makers and citizen developers out there who can touch it, but those become pretty limited. And I think they're limited for a reason. But because they're so easy, that entry point is so easy, I think it leaves this false impression that anybody can do IT. And yes, to a degree, but mm-hmm. once you start to talk about enterprise scale, once you talk about reliability and redundancy and scalability and compliance like Sarbanes-Oxley or PCI, it's very easy to get over your skis. And I think for that reason, it's sometimes really hard to explain to folks who are those in that citizen developer and maker side what that needs to look like if we're going to truly make something enterprise grade and enterprise wide.
Yeah, it's a really good call out. And I think I'm seeing a lot of organizations that are have, like change champions or agile enthusiasts that are bringing in the different suite of tools and products out there, maybe not really thinking about the interactions with other products and tools. And then they're probably putting in personal data and not really thinking about that compliance space. So it just seems like that's the easy option. And I know we've spoken about this before, but then it ends up becoming IT's problem after the fact because they're not engaged early on in the project.
Well, that's right. Either hey, come and fix this. Or, when you're talking about a company that's 1,000 people or more, they don't know who built the thing they're trying to use. They just know it's a thing that they're doing on their computer. So they assume always that it's IT who's behind it, right? So they will come to us. They'll come to our service desk asking for help with whatever it is. So we do have this obligation for our company to step in and to help them out.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think there's probably a bit of work being done in this space generally to help people understand it so that it doesn't become IT comes to the rescue after that fact, but actually engaging them in the project process early. How are you introducing or enabling IT to be part of, more enterprise projects early on rather than having to deal with the aftermath?
I think that's where there is a very large degree to which leadership has to set that stage. I'm talking about my level and above, right? It's a inherent cultural thing, right? To make sure it's understood that, yes, I know that technically you're maybe out at this plant in, the middle of Mississippi and you have a cable and you feel like you could just plug it into the network, but no, you really can't. You need to engage IT and why. So I think there's a lot of need to both educate at that senior leadership level, and then have that obligation from senior leaders down to their different pillars within the organization to emphasize that no, we really have to rein this in. You can do so much with policy and such, but the more you can have people see that value, see the reason why, and accept that no, we need to we all have an obligation to keep our company secure. So therefore, we shouldn't be doing this out on our own. We should be engaging with IT. I think removing barriers as well, right? Making it so that that reputation of, well, when we come to IT, we're gonna have to wait in line. It's going to take 6 months, 8 months, 12 months to get something done. And no, how can we break that and do things more quickly? Will also helps to get that upfront partnership with our business.
And then speaking of partnership, obviously having the opportunity to work at the VP level, you're dealing with your senior sort of executive peers that maybe also not in the day-to-day of IT. So how do you help them to I guess be part of the journey of key projects and programs from a sponsorship perspective, so that they can help to ensure the success, even though they may not be directly involved, but it's their teams that are involved? So how do you communicate those things, and what sort of tips or tricks can you share to help others that are trying to bring other peers on the journey?
Yeah, so how you were actually, we engaged with your group with AMO. Got to give you some credit here, Fatima, to help us reinvent and rethink a little bit of our pipeline process and our intake form. That still exists today, just to update you on that.
That's great.
We do still at times struggle to have people fill it out and ask us for the help, but I do think that the more that we promote that, the more we show the successes, the more that they're going to fill it out. So and then partner with us. So just to me, a lot of it is making things as easy as possible to engage. Let's use plain English instead of big technology terms.
Yes.
Let's not make IT be that strange group that people only halfway understand and maybe don't fully understand. Just really be part of the team and recognize we are here to support the business, not the other way around. So we have to make it easy for them to come to us.
And I think that's evident you're right, when we did some work together, but it was evident for me seeing how to bring that group on the journey. It was about sort of articulating the benefit and the value of what sort of changes were happening. But also I remember you listening to the challenges and pain points they were having that was filtered up from their teams as well.
That's absolutely right. So, get all ideas. No idea is a bad idea, right? But then let that filter up and really take that, especially as if your company is trying to grow or trying to, the company isn't, right? Trying to grow, trying to save costs, trying to increase revenue, all of those important metrics. Well, it's our leaders who need to take those ideas and partner with us, we partner back with them. It's a two-way street here. But to say, okay, what really is going to help to move the needle for our business, and make every decision that we make on our priorities, on what we're going to work on where I'm going to put my resources, when I'm going to outsource and spend that money as well, but what will actually help to move those important needles for our business, whatever our goals are for this year from a revenue or a EBITDA standpoint or whatever it might be. How can we partner to recognize that?
And then thinking about achieving success, how do you balance as a leader of a large team, giving strategic guidance, but also allowing the teams the freedom to explore and innovate?
Yeah, in recent years, I've been really enamored with the product management, that part of the product management discipline that I think that group has really mastered, as far as this is how I interpret it in my world, right? Look, the goal coming from senior leadership should be those metrics. It should be something like, hey, we need to, increase the tonnage that we're sending out from this plant by 10% within the next year, or whatever it is, whatever the metric, however you measure it. And then leave it to that team, right? Pick a good team, pick a talented team, pick a trustworthy team, a team that that you can then empower and say, look, I need you to keep us updated, right? Tell us what's going on. There has to be some sense of urgency because we're all in this together. We need to do this. We have to get this done. The sooner we can get it done, the more our company is going to grow and the better we're all going to be part of this with us, part of this journey with us. But then don't get into the weeds of the how, right? As far as absolutely here, we will break things down into small increments. We want to have small, quick successes. If you can only get 0.5% in a month, you got 0.5% in a month. That's a great gain. That's better than nothing. So don't, stop short of dictating how they break it down and those choices. Give them that freedom to own, but also make it very safe to fail. We use those words, and that's, again, very fundamental to any Agile methodology. But then I don't think we actually act that way often as leaders, right? We then get upset when a deadline is missed or a budget is exceeded or somebody doesn't quite get things done exactly the way you wanted to. We've got to be more accepting of risks and have good open conversations, enjoy talking about what could go wrong, acknowledge that things will go wrong, and then do our part to help them when they do, right? That the team is going to need us to help to intervene, to help to have their backs and to help them to get through it. They don't mean to fail. They don't mean to make mistakes. None of us do, but it's inevitable that we will.
And you're right. Feeling safe to fail means that, you're experimenting, and a lot of the time they may actually succeed, but they wouldn't have tried if they didn't have that confidence that they weren't going to get a slap on the wrist for not actually trying.
Correct. Or if they weren't given, I think the way that you see it sometimes in reality is they don't bother to try because they're so focused on some other kind of bogus goal that isn't really the goal, right? It's not that 10% goal. It's some side interim thing that people just decided to put a pin on and are a little bit obsessed with. Well, that doesn't give them that flexibility to deviate or to experiment or to try. If they have that in their minds as far as what they're really trying to accomplish and ensure that everything that they're doing is striving toward that real business value goal, that keeps their scope in check. That gives them that freedom that we're talking about. It to me, it so much leads from that. And I, thank the product management side of the world here for kind of helping to drive that mindset, because I think it's really impactful from an IT standpoint.
And you're right around, you mentioned partnering. I think that the relationship between product teams and delivery teams working closely together is also helping to drive great results.
Absolutely, right? Neither team should work independently, right? Why, the two have to be partners in lockstep, talking all the time, sharing all the time. You can't have one side without the other. You'll never be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to tech. Obviously, you've been in tech for 30 years, so you've probably seen a lot. I'm keen to understand maybe if you can give some examples of where you've seen technology or technology integration have a significant impact on business efficiency, if there's any examples that come to mind.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot. That's the cool thing. A great example, going back a few years back, it was a manufacturing company, and it's a company that uses transload. So, getting the terminology out there, they're shipping a product from the plant facility, trying to get it to the customer's location. Well, from a transportation and logistics standpoint, often it might be more cost efficient to use a big unit train, 100 rail car train, to ship to a thing called a transload facility. The product goes into a silo at that facility, and then the customers can send their trucks to pick up truckload by truckload for that last mile, for that shorter distance, more expensive distance, because it's a truck instead of a rail car. But it just drives that efficiency. Well, the company had a pretty extensive transload network, but it's that at that point when that truck is filled that the customer sales order is completed, right? So now we can bill the customer, we can get the payment from the customer. Well, those transloads aren't owned by the company. They're third parties, and they're all different kinds of third parties. And we're talking, out in West Texas, out in the middle of nowhere, not a lot of technology or high technology, but there's enough out there. So we implemented a solution wherein our system would go through a middleware component. We had a trading partner agreement behind it all to help to set that policy. But we would let the transloads know effectively what is expected to come their way. Hey, we're expecting, here's the trains, here's the volumes, here's the products that we're sending your way. And correspondingly, as the trucks would pick up from the transload facility, send those sales order data, those shipments back to us that we could then bill that same day, that same night, out to the customer, increase the timeliness of gaining that revenue, reduce a ton of internal labor effort that would have to go towards manually handling it, increase the visibility to the inventory volumes, both at the plants, at the transloads, and in transit. Really, all of that with, frankly, what comes down to some pretty simple and basic, technology that just, okay, hey, we're going to send you the data in this format. We're going to check it. You're going to receive it. You're going to send it back. Here's the error handling that we'll handle, and really got it going. So it was many, many wins out of, frankly, one pretty elegant little solution.
And it's really interesting because that would have been done probably manually before that idea of
absolutely
creating efficiency was even suggested.
Sure. Emails, phone calls, etc. A lot of inaccuracies, a lot of manual effort.
And then you mentioned, partner agreement. I'm really keen. We've been dealing with a number of clients recently who have realized, particularly with the volume of projects that companies are having to deal with, sometimes they are having to work with third-party partners, whether it's in the capacity of delivering something, whether it's working in tech, etc. What are some of the things that were in sort of the partner agreement that helped to support that foundation moving forward?
Well, so for this, it was a pretty technical document, right? Because here we're talking about data exchanges. Mm-hmm. And, this agreement that said, hey, here's, how we're going to send it to you. Here's the frequency. Here's the error coding that we're going to use. And here's our obligation that if we're going to change anything, we're going to give you X days, 60 days, 90 days. I don't remember what it was. Advance notice of this change coming in. We'll partner with you on testing, etc. Also some expectations and standards, as I recall, around, uptime and reliability, that, mm-hmm. Hey, if we're having a failure on our side, we will have resolution within some degree of an SLA mm-hmm. Type of a model. So that's effectively that. Some again, it's been a few years, but also, data privacy, confidentiality, and ownership. Because then whenever you're talking about exchanging data from one group to another, you have to think about how you're protecting your data in transit as well as at rest at that source location.
It's really interesting because a lot of those themes, like your cadences, your back to your metrics, your escalations path, your governance, obviously standard data delivery, how it sounds so simple, but I think more companies probably need to embed or introduce it, particularly in organizations where, going back to Agile for a minute, there's a lot of organizations that are, using third-party companies to help them execute delivery, and they might deliver in Agile and then traditionally you might deliver it differently internally. And then there's a mismatch between the two partners and how they deliver.
They're always, yes, and I think that's an age-old dilemma, right? I remember I spent a lot of time when I did federal consulting, setting standards around what the SDLC would be and the artifacts, and here's the template, and it's government, right? So they're going to have a template for everything, at least back in the day. And then you would bring in a third party, or I would be a third party, perhaps. Representing a third party who brings in perhaps a different way of doing things and trying to deal with those apples and oranges. The way I've always looked at it is that that should be part of that upfront conversation, right? If I'm expecting you as a third party to deliver something in a certain format and I'm rigid on that format, why wouldn't that be part of my SOW? That should be in the deliverables list. That should start at the contract.
100%.
If you try to add it later, you're going to miss something. So let's be upfront. It helps the vendor to size the quote more accurately.
Yes.
It becomes a win-win really up front. But then also choose where you don't need that rigidity, right? If the vendor's way of handling things, if their process is equally or more so, more efficient, if you're going to get ultimately the artifacts that you need for your compliance or whatever you need them for to be able to maintain it in the future, a different way, then I think you should be questioning why you are putting certain requirements on top of it if they're unnecessary.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We're talking to a customer at the moment that's trying to, merge some of their ways of working between two different businesses. And the question is, who's got the more mature processes? So we have to do an assessment to understand that, and then pick from each side which bit is the most relevant for that particular point in time.
That's absolutely right. That's a great way to do it. That's to look at maturity, to look at which one is gonna get it done better, and perhaps have that humility to say perhaps it's not ours.
100%. And I think also just going back to not necessarily applying rigid standards and guidelines and all of that stuff, the way that I think some organizations are trying to embed traditional governance into Agile delivery, and it just doesn't work. It really stifles delivery teams as well. So that comes into play, but particularly with partners where you're very heavily dependent on them being able to help your business be successful. So speaking of teams, we mentioned briefly before, now obviously the company you're working at the moment, you've got teams in different locations, if I remember correctly. So is there any advice you can give or any techniques that you've used to managing teams that are dispersed?
Yeah, that's a hard one because I think I read it long ago that there is no more effective way to get through that forming, storming, norming, and performing than being co-located. Physical co-location, there's unquestionably, you get those little hallway conversations. You can go out for a beer after work if you want to with your colleagues. You can, laugh and together and do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. In this day and age, of course, that's really difficult, but I still think that there's, if possible, at certain points of the project timeline, right? At the kickoff, at the beginning, can you get everybody together? Certainly for a major initiative, if you're doing a big conference room pilot or user acceptance testing session, absolutely, it will always be worth it to fly everybody in, sit them down together for a week and work through it. That there's no question, you're going to be more efficient, you're going to find more bugs, you're going to get it done, and you're going to get it done better. Otherwise, in between, again, daily stand-up, kind of going back to what Cindy taught me so many years ago, just go to the basics and the simple stuff, talk. I think that, especially in IT, we forget to communicate. I think that we don't naturally, I think it's probably partly our nature, we're not exactly leading as communicators, but we've got to work on that. We need to find our way to even just sit down and let the team have a conversation, right? And don't be the person who's doing all the talking, right? Remember to close your mouth and let them just kind of interact and grow organically. So just daily Zoom or Teams calls. I absolutely encourage it. And I think time and again, nobody has said, you might have grumbled a little bit about really every day.
Mm-hmm.
But then once they're a few weeks in, 100% they don't grumble. They completely see the value of it. They're part of the team. They feel part of that team.
100%. It's interesting. We've seen and used the daily stand-up concept quite a lot, and I find when people grumble, it's because they're underprepared. They haven't made any progress in that day, and they're probably actually not doing any work. So
you can't hide in Agile. You can't.
Exactly.
Hey, I'm a manager. I like that.
Exactly. 100%. And then just going back to the remote thing. Obviously, when we work together, our teams work completely remotely, all online. Which worked really well. But if you remember, and it was a little while ago, but one of the things we did at the beginning was like the engagement success check. So we would communicate it, going back to the partner agreement concepts, like what is the cadence of how often we're going to meet? What is the frequency? How are we going to escalate? Who's involved in the meetings? Or how are you going to receive the deliverables? And we use Teams for collaboration. So it's completely possible to do, and more than ever, since obviously the influx of collaboration tools that exist out there that have helped to drive that relationship. But like I said, if people are grumbling, it's probably because they're not doing the work and they don't want to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
So we'll leave that one there. But just going back to tools. What, if anything, are you in your team at the moment? Are you experimenting with any AI tools or plugins, or is there anything that's really exciting you that you're seeing in the AI space, just generally based on your IT experience?
Yeah, one of the so we're putting out guidance around the proper use of Gen AI. Microsoft Copilot, would probably be one of the first ones that we're really opening up. We do have a small group who's starting on that. One of the ones that I'm actually more excited about, it just happens to be timing wise, where we are evaluating and we'll be implementing a new ITSM tool. We've been in one that we've a little bit older, and we're going to a much more modern tool set for our service operations and service management tool set. And with that, the tool that we've chosen is an AI component, so that our internal customers can ask the questions, can put in get some degree of immediate feedback, but also our internal service desk technicians can have the Gen AI help them to author their responses to it. So I think that's actually really cool, and I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see how our business partners will be, how they're going to use it, and how that might catch on. So
it's really interesting to see, particularly like the Microsoft Copilot becoming a lot more prevalent. It makes sense, especially for an organization they're running like all the other Microsoft Suite products as well. So it's quite crazy how rapidly this space is evolving. By the time you've launched something else has happened.
That's absolutely correct. I think that something that we will be looking at, we have a pretty matured enterprise data warehouse, lakehouse. So how can we and where should we really use something like AI to help us make better business decisions based on that, healthy data warehouse that we have? I fully expect that we're going to be touching on that in the not too distant future. We haven't quite started on it, but that's certainly coming.
There's obviously a big balancing act between all of the strategic initiatives one has to do. So no doubt you'll be prioritizing accordingly using the intake process.
Using the intake process, that's correct.
Just thinking back to obviously you kind of climbed up the corporate ladder with your career in project management. You did work in project management offices, and then obviously now in the VP of IT role, which is quite an achievement. Now it's probably, we would say, fair to say that there's probably not not as many women in IT and or women in IT leadership positions, at least, not as many as there should be. What advice could you give to more women who maybe want to explore IT better? Like what advice can you give them and other aspiring IT leaders more generally?
Yeah, I absolutely think that there is a big gap that women can fill in the IT space, right? I think the more diverse and different points of view you have on a team, just the more successful you will be. And that's just flat out based on my experience, right? That's what I've seen time and time again. And so, of course, we need more women to help to make that happen as part of that recipe. As for advice, I think, as a woman, sometimes you do feel the need to be better than the average bear, right? You feel like you're walking into a situation where perhaps you're feeling like you're already, at a disadvantage. And I'm saying you feel like it because you have to recognize that that's not always the case, right? That a lot of the times that's you kind of reflecting outward or projecting outward, I guess, your own insecurities. So, learning how to kind of put that to the side, put those uncertainties, put those assumptions of judgment to the side and saying, look, I'm here just as much as everybody else. Absolutely. Have I, dealt with some situations where I felt like, it was my gender that came into play? Absolutely, in my career. But the instances are so few and far between that you shouldn't lead with that assumption. Never. Shouldn't lead with that assumption. Let's start with that trust, that openness. We're all in this together. We should be, the kind of company that I want to work for, the kind of leader that I want to be is one who's embracing, accepting, and trusting. So it starts with our own behaviors, and then the team will follow, right? So we can make our own culture if we just choose to, in a lot of ways. So I might have deviated a little bit from your intent with the question, Fatima, but that's just something that I've always felt pretty passionately about.
I think it's a really good reflection, and it also sort of ties into that feeling, and I've had it as well, that imposter syndrome, or when you're, one of the only females in the room, but sometimes you think, it gets a bit overwhelming, and you're like, especially like early on in your career as a younger professional. In my past, I'd be in the room and I'd feel like I was the youngest in the room, and then being female as well, and then being from a culturally diverse background. So it's all of those sort of barriers that you feel, but it's really great to see more executive leaders, and particularly in women as well, who are making paths for others like us to come into that place as well. So it's really great to see that, and it's really great to see a VP IT female. I know there's a lot more of them these days, and it's growing and growing and growing, but there's still not enough executive leaders that are female. So thanks for contributing to that positive statistic. Katherine, we have a tradition on the podcast to close out with our key question, which is, if there's anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, a call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder today.
I feel like I've given a lot of advice in this conversation, Fatima. Again, I need to, and it's kind of that call to action, and that advice is, keep things simple. I think for all people, all of us, gender topics aside, let's boil things down to those basics. Let's know what we're capable of. Let's have the humility to know where we're not, quite as capable. And not be afraid to try, right? Just put it out there, and accept it. If you failed miserably, accept it. Okay, you've learned. You're going to move on. You're going to be okay. But to kind of not have that fear.
Well said. And I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning about being okay to fail, because we're learning from those failures as well. So great advice. Thank you so much, Katherine, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Fatima. Great seeing you again.
You too. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media And to stay up to date with all things Agile Ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?